The true story of Greenland's unnamed. The true story of Greenland's first people and the struggle for Kalaallit Nunaat. A 30-minute journey through courage, resistance, and survival. Welcome, listeners from around the world. Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. Today we're traveling to one of the most extraordinary places on Earth, Kalaallit Nunaat, the land the world calls Greenland. This is a story that has been silenced for too long, a story of resilience, resistance, and the unbreakable spirit of the Inuit people. Before we begin this powerful journey, give us a thumbs up if you're ready to hear untold histories. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss our stories of Indigenous peoples and forgotten struggles. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from: USA, Denmark, Greenland, Canada, Indigenous territories. We want to hear from you. Share this story with everyone who needs to know the truth about colonization and Indigenous resistance. Today's 30-minute story will reveal how the Inuit thrived in the harshest environment on Earth for thousands of years. Their ingenious survival techniques, food systems, and spiritual traditions. Their festivals, celebrations, and community life before colonization. How Denmark colonized Greenland through manipulation and force. The resistance, abuse, and ongoing struggle for sovereignty. Why this story matters today and what we can learn from it. Content warning. This story contains descriptions of colonization, cultural suppression, abuse, and historical trauma. We tell it because truth matters, because Indigenous voices matter, and because silence perpetuates injustice. Remember, if this story moves you, subscribing helps us continue telling these important histories. Your engagement matters. Now, let's journey to the top of the world, to a land of ice and determination, to discover the truth about Kalaallit Nunaat. Part 1. The People of the Ice Before Contact. Chapter 1. Kalaallit Nunaat, the Land of People. Long before Europeans discovered Greenland, long before it was given that misleading name by Norse settlers trying to attract colonists to an icy land, the island was home to the Kalaallit, the Greenlandic Inuit people. They didn't call their land Greenland. They called it Kalaallit Nunaat, the land of the Kalaallit, because it was their land. It had always been their land. The Kalaallit were the descendants of the Thule people who migrated from Alaska across the Arctic around 1300 CE, bringing with them sophisticated survival technologies and a culture perfectly adapted to life in the extreme north. Before them, the Sakak and Dorset peoples had lived on the island for thousands of years. But this wasn't a story of primitive people barely surviving in a frozen wasteland, as colonial histories would later portray them. This was a story of brilliance, adaptation, community, and deep spiritual connection to one of Earth's most challenging environments. Chapter 2. Life in the Eternal Winter. Imagine living in a place where winter temperatures drop to -50 degrees Celsius, -58 degrees Fahrenheit, where the sun disappears completely for months at a time, where a simple mistake could mean death by freezing within minutes. Yet the Kalaallit not only survived, they thrived. Housing and warmth. The Kalaallit built ingenious homes called karmak in summer, semi-subterranean houses made of stone, turf, and driftwood, partly underground to insulate against the cold. The thick walls of earth and stone kept the interior warm even when howling winds raged outside. In winter hunting seasons, they constructed temporary shelters called igluit, what we call igloos, dome-shaped houses made entirely of snow blocks. These weren't crude survival shelters, they were architectural marvels. The snow blocks were cut at precise angles, stacked in a spiral that locked together, creating a structure strong enough to stand on. Inside, a small blubber lamp could heat the space to comfortable temperatures, while the outside might be -40 degrees Celsius. The entrance was always built below the main floor level, a genius design that trapped cold air in the entrance tunnel while warm air stayed in the living space. Windows were made from clear ice or seal intestine stretched thin to let in light. Clothing. The Kalaallit wore layered clothing made from caribou and seal skins, each piece designed with deep knowledge of thermal dynamics. Inner layers had the fur facing inward against the skin. Outer layers had fur facing outward. This created an insulating air pocket that trapped body heat while allowing moisture to escape, preventing the deadly combination of wetness and cold. Their boots, kamik, were masterpieces of engineering: waterproof seal skin bottoms, insulated caribou fur uppers, and grass insulation inside that absorbed moisture. A person could walk through icy water and keep their feet warm and dry. Food and hunting. The Kalalit diet was almost entirely animal-based by necessity. In a landscape where few plants grew, they became master hunters. Seal hunting was the foundation of survival. Seals provided meat, high in fat, essential for surviving cold, blubber for lamp fuel and additional calories, skins for clothing, boots, kayaks, and bones for tools and needles. Hunting seals required incredible patience and skill. In winter, seals breathed through small holes in the ice. A hunter would wait motionless for hours in -40 degrees Celsius temperatures, harpoon ready, watching multiple breathing holes. When the seal finally surfaced, the hunter had one chance: miss, and the seal disappeared, and the hunter's family might go hungry. Narwhal, beluga, and walrus hunting was communal and dangerous. Men in kayaks would work together to herd marine mammals toward shore, using coordinated movements perfected over generations. One mistake, a capsized kayak in Arctic waters, meant death within minutes. Caribou hunting provided essential furs for winter clothing and additional meat. Hunting parties would travel inland for days, reading the land, tracking herds, understanding caribou behavior patterns passed down through stories. Fishing through ice holes sustained communities in winter. Arctic char, cod, and halibut were caught using bone hooks and braided sinew lines. Nothing was wasted, ever. Seal intestines became waterproof windows and clothing. Bones became needles, fish hooks, and sled runners. Sinew became thread. Blubber became lamp fuel. Even the contents of a caribou's stomach, partially digested plants, provided necessary vitamins in winter. Chapter 3: The Spiritual World. The Kalaallit understanding of the universe was sophisticated and deeply spiritual. They didn't see themselves as separate from nature, but as part of it, related to the animals they hunted, connected to the land and sea that sustained them. Inua, the spirit within. Every living thing had an Inua, a spirit or soul. Animals had Inua. Humans had Inua. Even the ice, the wind, and the sea had Inua. Hunting wasn't just a physical act, it was a spiritual transaction. Before a hunt, hunters would perform rituals of respect. After a successful seal hunt, a few drops of fresh water would be placed in the seal's mouth. An offering, because seals live in salt water and thirst for fresh water. This showed respect and ensured the seal's Inua would tell other seals that hunters were respectful, encouraging future hunts to succeed. Shamans, Angakuit. The Angakuit, shamans, were spiritual leaders who could communicate with the spirit world. Through drumming, chanting, and entering trance states, they would journey to other realms to speak with animal spirits to ensure successful hunts, heal the sick by retrieving lost souls or removing spiritual obstacles, predict weather, crucial for survival in the Arctic, resolve community conflicts by uncovering hidden truths, guide souls of the dead to the afterlife. Becoming an Angakuk required years of training, often involving isolation, fasting, and visionary experiences. It wasn't a position of power for its own sake. It was a profound responsibility to serve the community's spiritual and practical needs. Sedna, the Sea Woman. One of the most important deities was Sedna, also called Nuliajuk or Taluliuk in different regions, the powerful spirit who controlled all sea mammals. According to legend, Sedna was once a woman who was thrown into the sea. As she clung to the boat, her fingers were cut off and became the seals, walruses, and whales. Now she lived at the bottom of the ocean, and when humans violated taboos or acted disrespectfully, she would hold back the animals, causing famine. When hunts failed repeatedly, an Angakuk might journey spiritually to Sedna's underwater realm to comb her hair, which she couldn't do herself without fingers, and plead for the release of animals. This reinforced the critical importance of respecting nature and living according to community values. Chapter 4: Community, Celebration and Culture. The Kalaallit were not isolated individuals struggling alone against nature. They were deeply communal, understanding that survival in the Arctic required cooperation, generosity, and strong social bonds. Sharing economy: when a hunter killed a seal or caribou, the meat was shared according to traditional rules. The hunter who made the kill got specific portions, but extended family, elders, and those in need also received shares. This ensured no one starved when hunts were scarce and built social cohesion. Hoarding was socially unacceptable and could result in ostracism, a death sentence in the Arctic where community support was essential for survival. Storytelling, Okalutuat. Long winter nights were filled with storytelling. Elders would tell stories that served multiple purposes: educational tales teaching survival skills, geography, and hunting techniques; moral stories reinforcing community values and appropriate behavior; historical accounts preserving the people's history and migrations; entertainment providing joy and connection during dark winter months; stories about Kiviuk, the eternal wanderer, taught about perseverance; tales of Kalupalik, the creature who takes children who go near the ice edge alone, taught safety. Stories about Mahaha, the laughing demon that tickles people to death, might seem strange but taught children to respect the dangers of the cold and never to wander alone. Drum dancing and throat singing, drumming, kilat, was both entertainment and spiritual practice. Large frame drums made of seal or caribou skin, stretched over driftwood frames, would be beaten rhythmically while dancers moved in circular patterns, telling stories through movement. Throat singing, katajak, was a unique art form, usually performed by two women facing each other, creating rhythmic, harmonic sounds that mimicked natural sounds: wind, animal calls, the crack of ice. It was competition, entertainment, and meditation all at once. Summer festivals. When summer finally arrived, with temperatures reaching a balmy 10 degrees Celsius /50 degrees Fahrenheit, communities would gather for larger celebrations. First seal festivals, where the year's first caught seal was honored with ritual and feast. Midsummer gatherings, where scattered families reunited, traded, arranged marriages, and shared news. Kayak races and drum dance competitions showcased skill and brought joy. Story competitions where storytellers competed to tell the best or most creative tales. These gatherings weren't frivolous. They were essential for maintaining social networks, sharing survival knowledge, strengthening culture, and building the relationships that sustained Arctic communities through long, isolated winters. Engagement moment. If you're amazed by the ingenuity of the Kalaallit people, show your respect with a thumbs up. Comment respect if Indigenous knowledge inspires you. And please, tell us where you're listening from. We love connecting with our global community. Now let's continue to When Outsiders Arrived. Part 2. The Arrival of Strangers. Chapter 5. The Norse, First Contact. The first Europeans to reach Greenland were Norse settlers, led by Eric the Red in 985 CE. Eric had been exiled from Iceland for murder and needed a new place to settle. He explored the southwestern coast of Greenland and, in a brilliant piece of false advertising, named it Greenland to make it sound appealing to potential settlers. The Norse established two main settlements on the southwestern coast where the climate was slightly less harsh. At their peak, around 5,000 Norse lived in Greenland. Initial contact. When the Norse arrived, they encountered the Dorset people, who would later be displaced by the Thule/Kalaallit migration. Initial contact was probably minimal and wary on both sides. The Norse called the indigenous people Skraeling, a derogatory term. They viewed them as inferior, primitive. This was the beginning of a pattern that would define European indigenous relations in Greenland for centuries: dismissal, dehumanization, assumption of superiority. There was some trade. The Norse wanted furs and walrus ivory. The indigenous people were curious about iron tools. But mostly, the groups avoided each other. Norse collapse. By the 1400s, the Norse colonies had completely disappeared. The reasons are debated. Climate change, the medieval warm period ended, making farming even harder. Resource depletion, conflict with indigenous peoples, or simply unsustainability of European agricultural practices in the Arctic. Whatever the cause, the Norse vanished, leaving behind only ruins. The Kalaallit survived and thrived. This should have taught future European colonizers something about adaptation and respect for indigenous knowledge. It didn't. Chapter 6, The Return, Danish-Norwegian colonization begins. For several centuries after the Norse disappeared, Greenland had minimal European contact. The Kalaallit lived their traditional lives, their population stable at around 10,000 people by the early 1700s. Then, in 1721, everything changed. Hans Egede, the Apostle of Greenland, a Norwegian-Danish missionary named Hans Egede, became obsessed with converting Greenland's population to Christianity. He convinced the Danish king to sponsor a colonial mission, ostensibly for saving souls. On July 3, 1721, Egede arrived on the west coast of Greenland with his family and established a mission at what would become Nuuk, Godthåb in Danish. Egede's mission had three interrelated goals. 1. Convert the Kalaallit to Christianity. 2. Establish Danish sovereignty over Greenland. 3. Exploit Greenland's resources, particularly whales and seals. The Kalaallit watched these strange newcomers with suspicion. They had heard stories of the Norse. They had learned to be wary of Europeans. The missionary strategy. Egede didn't arrive with guns blazing. The Danish colonial strategy was more insidious, cultural conversion and gradual control disguised as benevolence. First, they offered trade goods, iron knives, cooking pots, cloth. These items made life easier than traditional tools, creating dependency. Once Kalaallit communities relied on European goods, they became vulnerable to European control. Second, they targeted children. Egede established schools where Kalaallit children would be taught Danish, Christianity, and civilized behavior. This was cultural genocide disguised as education, separating children from their language, spirituality, and traditional knowledge. Third, they used Christianity to undermine traditional belief systems. Shamans were declared devil worshippers. Traditional festivals were pagan rituals. The spiritual practices that had sustained Kalaallit communities for millennia were criminalized. Chapter 7, The Squeeze tightens. Over the next decades, Danish control expanded, more missions were established, more traders arrived, colonial administration was imposed. The Royal Greenland Trading Company, 1774. In 1774, the Danish crown created a monopoly, the Royal Greenland Trading Company, KGH. This company had exclusive rights to all trade in Greenland. What this meant in practice, Kalaallit hunters could only sell to the KGH. They had to accept whatever prices the KGH offered. They could only buy from the KGH. The KGH set prices high for goods sold to Kalaallit and low for goods purchased from them. This created a cycle of debt and dependency. Kalaallit who resisted or tried to trade with non-Danish ships were punished. Their traditional economy, based on sharing and mutual support, was forcibly replaced with a colonial cash economy designed to extract wealth. Residential schools, cultural destruction. As the 1800s progressed, the Danish systematically removed Kalaallit children from their families and placed them in boarding schools where speaking Kalaallisut, Greenlandic language, was forbidden and punished. Traditional clothing was replaced with European dress. Traditional names were replaced with Danish names. Traditional skills were not taught. Christianity was mandatory. Physical and emotional abuse was common. Sexual abuse occurred and was covered up. The goal was explicit: kill the Indian, save the man, as similar policies were articulated in North America. Erase indigenous identity and replace it with European identity. Imagine being a Kalaallit parent, watching strangers take your children away to schools where they would be taught to be ashamed of everything you had taught them, where they would learn that their language was inferior, their beliefs were evil, their culture was primitive. Now imagine that lasting for generations. Chapter 8, Resistance, the spirit that would not break. But the Kalalit did not simply submit. Resistance took many forms. Passive resistance. Some communities retreated to more remote areas where Danish control was weaker. They maintained traditional practices in secret, passing knowledge to their children away from colonial eyes. They told stories, the old stories, the forbidden stories, in whispered Kalaallisut when Danish administrators weren't listening. They sang traditional songs. They taught children to hunt the old way. This quiet resistance preserved knowledge that would have otherwise been lost. Active resistance. Some Kalaallit openly defied Danish rules. They refused to send children to mission schools. They conducted traditional spiritual ceremonies despite prohibitions. They traded with non-Danish ships when possible. These acts of defiance were dangerous. Punishment could include confiscation of hunting equipment, essentially a death sentence, imprisonment, removal of children, denial of trade goods, exile from communities. Yet people resisted anyway. Because colonization wasn't just about physical control, it was about spiritual and cultural annihilation. And some things are worth risking everything to preserve. One story of courage. In the late 1800s, an Angakuk shaman named Avia Aja continued practicing traditional spiritual healing despite Danish prohibitions. When a Danish missionary demanded she stop, she refused. "You say my practices are evil," she reportedly said, "but when your medicines fail and your God does not answer, the people come to me. Who are you to say my ancestors' wisdom is worthless?" She was eventually arrested and died in Danish custody. But her defiance inspired others. The colonizers could imprison her body, but they couldn't imprison the knowledge she carried or the spirit of resistance she embodied. Engagement moment. The courage of indigenous resistance needs to be heard. If this story is moving you, hit that like button. Comment with the name of any indigenous people or territory you want us to honor. Share this with everyone who needs to understand the real history of colonization. Where are you listening from? Tell us below. Part 3. Colonization deepens. Chapter 9. The 20th century. Total control. As the 1900s began, Danish control over Greenland became absolute. In 1905, Denmark formally incorporated Greenland as a colony, removing even the pretense of the Kalaallit having any say in their own governance. The Closed Country Policy, 1921. In a paternalistic move justified as protecting the Kalaallit from exploitation, Denmark declared Greenland a closed country. Only those with Danish government permission could visit or trade there. This sounds protective, but its real effects were total Danish monopoly on Greenland's economy, complete isolation of Kalaallit from the outside world, no outside witnesses to Danish colonial practices, prevention of Kalaallit from making international connections or alliances. The Kalaallit became prisoners in their own land, unable to leave without permission, unable to invite others in, their entire existence controlled by a distant power that claimed to know what was best for them. Forced relocations. Throughout the mid-20th century, Denmark forcibly relocated Kalaallit communities, justified as modernization and civilization. Small, remote villages were deemed uneconomical. Families were forced to leave homes their ancestors had occupied for generations and move to larger towns where they could be more easily controlled and where traditional hunting lifestyles became impossible. These relocations destroyed community structures, disconnected people from their traditional hunting grounds, and created social problems, alcoholism, depression, suicide, that plague Greenlandic communities to this day. The Thule Air Base scandal. In 1951, in perhaps the most egregious example of colonial abuse, Denmark allowed the United States to build a military air base, Thule Air Base, in northwestern Greenland without consulting the Kalaallit people. The indigenous village of Uummannaq, Dundas, was located exactly where the US wanted to build. The solution? Forcibly relocate the entire community within 4 days in 1953, in the middle of winter, with only a few hours' notice. Families were torn from homes. Hunting grounds were contaminated with military waste. The relocated people received inadequate housing and compensation. Many died from the trauma and loss. For decades, Denmark denied any wrongdoing. Only in 2003 did the Danish Supreme Court acknowledge what had happened, though compensation remained inadequate. This wasn't ancient history. This happened within living memory. There are Kalalit elders alive today who remember being forcibly removed from their homes as children. Chapter 10. Cultural Genocide. The numbers don't lie. By the mid-20th century, the results of Danish colonization were clear. Language loss. In 1800, nearly 100% of Kalalit spoke only Kalaallisut. In 1950, most Kalaallit were bilingual, but Kalaallisut was declining. By 2000, many young urban Kalalit spoke Danish better than Kalaallisut. Traditional dialects and vocabulary were being lost. Cultural disruption, traditional drum dancing, nearly extinct. Shamanic practices, driven underground, knowledge partially lost. Traditional storytelling, declining as TV and Danish media dominated. Traditional hunting skills, fewer young people learning. Extended family structures, broken by forced relocations and schooling. Social devastation, suicide rates, among the highest in the world. Alcoholism, epidemic levels. Sexual abuse, particularly in boarding schools, often covered up. Poverty. Despite Greenland's natural resources, most Kalaallit remained poor. Health disparities, lower life expectancy, higher infant mortality than Denmark. These aren't abstract statistics. Each number represents a human being, a family, a community destroyed or damaged by colonial policies. Chapter 11. The Resource Theft. Throughout colonization, Denmark extracted enormous wealth from Greenland while giving little back. Cryolite. Greenland had the world's only major deposit of cryolite, essential for aluminum production. From the 1850s through the 1980s, Denmark mined this resource, earning massive profits. Almost none of that wealth went to the Kalalit people whose land it came from. Fish and marine mammals. Danish and European fishing fleets depleted Greenland's fish stocks, disrupting traditional Kalaallit fishing and forcing communities into cash economy dependence. Oil, gas, and minerals. As resource extraction technology advanced, Greenland's vast mineral wealth became accessible. Denmark claimed ownership, granting licenses to international corporations. Profits flowed to Copenhagen, not to Kalaallit communities. The pattern was always the same: take Greenland's resources, give minimal compensation, keep the profits, claim to be helping Greenland develop. This is the textbook definition of colonialism: exploitation justified as benevolence. Part 4. The Long Road to Self-Governance. Chapter 12. The Awakening, Kalaallit Assert Their Rights. By the 1960s and 70s, a new generation of Kalaallit leaders emerged, educated in Danish schools but proud of their heritage, aware of decolonization movements worldwide, and ready to fight for their rights. They demanded self-governance, control over their own resources, recognition of Kalaallisut as an official language, end to discriminatory policies, compensation for past abuses, the right to chart their own future. Home Rule, 1979. After years of pressure, Denmark granted Home Rule in 1979. This gave Greenland a degree of internal self-governance. A Greenlandic parliament, Inatsisartut, control over some policy areas, official status for Kalaallisut language, a step toward decolonization. But Denmark retained control over foreign affairs, defense, currency, and major economic policies. Significant veto power over Greenlandic decisions. Home Rule was progress, but it wasn't sovereignty. It was colonialism with a softer face. Self-government, 2009. In 2009, after a referendum where 75% of Greenlanders voted yes, Denmark granted expanded self-government. This included control over natural resources and resource revenues, control over police and courts, expanded control over domestic affairs, recognition of Kalaallit as a distinct people with the right to self-determination. Crucially, the 2009 Act acknowledged that Greenlanders have the right to independence if they choose it. Chapter 13. The struggle continues. Today, Greenland stands at a crossroads. Technically still part of the Danish realm, but with significant autonomy, the Kalaallit people face new challenges. Climate change. Arctic warming is happening twice as fast as the global average. This means traditional ice hunting grounds are becoming unreliable. Animal migration patterns are changing. Ancient knowledge about ice safety is becoming less applicable. New opportunities, longer shipping seasons, resource extraction, but also new threats. Economic dependency. Greenland still receives annual subsidies from Denmark, about $500 million. This creates dependence and gives Denmark continued influence. True independence would require economic self-sufficiency. Resource dilemma. Greenland has vast resources: oil, gas, rare earth minerals, potential for fishing expansion. But extracting these requires technology and capital Greenland doesn't have. International corporations want to extract these resources. Will Greenland repeat the colonial pattern? Outsiders profit while locals remain poor. How to balance economic development with environmental protection and traditional lifestyles. Cultural revival versus globalization. Young Kalaallit face competing forces: global culture, internet, music, fashion, pulling them toward homogenization. Cultural revival movements working to preserve language, traditions, knowledge. Economic pressure to learn Danish/English for job opportunities. The psychological trauma of colonization passed through generations. The independence question: should Greenland become fully independent? The debate is complex. Arguments for independence. Self-determination is a fundamental right. Control their own destiny and resources. End the colonial relationship once and for all. Full voting rights in international bodies. Psychological/spiritual healing from colonial trauma. Arguments for caution. Economic viability uncertain without Danish subsidies. Small population, 56,000, vulnerable in global politics. Risk of neo-colonialism from China, USA, or corporations. Need infrastructure and institutional development first. There's no easy answer, but increasingly young Kalaallit are saying, let us decide our own future, even if we make mistakes. They will be our mistakes, not someone else's. Engagement moment. This story isn't over, it's still being written by the Kalaallit people today. If you believe in indigenous self-determination, smash that like button, comment Kalaallit Nunaat to show solidarity. Share this video to spread awareness. And tell us, where are you watching from and what indigenous rights issues matter in your region? Epilogue: What we can learn. The story of Greenland isn't just historical, it's a living lesson for our present moment. Lessons for indigenous peoples everywhere. The Kalaallit story mirrors the stories of indigenous peoples worldwide. Colonizers always claim they're helping. Cultural genocide is often disguised as education or modernization. Resource theft is justified as development. Resistance takes many forms and never fully dies. Survival requires both preserving tradition and adapting to new realities. Self-determination is worth fighting for, across generations if necessary. Lessons for settler/colonial societies. If you're from Denmark, this is your history to reckon with. If you're from other colonial nations, USA, Canada, UK, France, Spain, etc., this is your pattern to recognize. True reconciliation requires acknowledging the truth of what was done, not making excuses or minimizing. Understanding that colonization isn't just historical, its effects continue. Supporting indigenous self-determination materially, not just rhetorically. Returning stolen resources and land where possible. Amplifying indigenous voices rather than speaking for them. Teaching honest history, including the ugly parts. Lessons for all of us. Indigenous knowledge isn't primitive, it's sophisticated adaptation to specific environments. What colonizers dismissed as savage often contained wisdom we desperately need. Survival in harsh environments requires community, not individualism. The Earth doesn't need saving. Humans need to learn to live in balance with it, as indigenous peoples have done for millennia. Resilience isn't just survival, it's maintaining identity, culture, and spirit despite overwhelming pressure to assimilate. The Ice Remembers. The title of this story is The Ice Never Forgets, because it's true. Embedded in the glaciers and ice sheets of Kalaallit Nunaat is the history of the Earth, ancient air bubbles, volcanic ash from eruptions millennia ago, pollen from plants long extinct. The ice is a record keeper, a witness. But also the Kalaallit people never forget. Though much was stolen, though trauma was inflicted, though attempts were made to erase them, they remain. Kalaallisut is still spoken. Traditional knowledge is being revived, stories are still told, and most importantly, the spirit of resistance, the same spirit that allowed them to thrive in one of Earth's harshest environments for thousands of years. That spirit endures. The colonizers thought they could break it. They failed. The ice never forgets, and neither do the Kalaallit. Kalaallit Nunaat, the land of the people. It was, it is, it always will be. End of story. Thank you for listening to this important story. Dear viewers, we've reached the end of this 30-minute journey through the true history of Kalaallit Nunaat, Greenland. This story of resilience, resistance, and ongoing struggle for sovereignty needs to be heard. If this story moved you, here's how you can help amplify it. Give us a thumbs up. Help this video reach more people who need to hear this history. Subscribe and hit the bell. Don't miss our upcoming stories about indigenous peoples, colonization, and resistance worldwide. Comment. We want to hear from you. Are you from Greenland or have Kalaallit heritage? Share your perspective. What surprised you most about this story? What indigenous rights issues are important in your region? Where are you listening from? Greenland? Denmark? Indigenous territories? Elsewhere? Tell us. Share this video with anyone interested in indigenous histories, those learning about colonization and its ongoing effects, educators teaching honest history, anyone who believes in self-determination and justice. More indigenous stories. Coming. Native American resistance, untold stories from Turtle Island. Pacific Islander sovereignty, fighting for islands and identity. Australian Aboriginal survival, 65,000 years and counting. African anti-colonial struggles, heroes who fought back. Canadian First Nations, truth and reconciliation. Subscribe now so you don't miss these essential histories. Take action beyond watching. Education is important, but action matters more. Here's how you can support Indigenous rights. 1. Educate yourself. Further, read books by Kalaallit authors. Follow Greenlandic media and voices. Learn about Indigenous issues in your own area. Study honest histories, not colonial propaganda. 2. Support Indigenous-led organizations, Inuit Circumpolar Council. Indigenous peoples organizations in your region. Land-back movements, cultural preservation initiatives. 3. Advocate for policy changes. Support Indigenous self-determination. Demand honest history in schools. Push for land return and reparations. Oppose resource extraction on Indigenous lands without consent. 4. Amplify Indigenous voices. Share content created by Indigenous people. Hire Indigenous creators and experts. Don't speak for Indigenous peoples, amplify their own voices. Support Indigenous artists, writers, and activists. 5. Examine your own position. If you're on Indigenous land, learn whose land. Understand how you benefit from colonization. Don't be defensive, be reflective. Act in solidarity, not from guilt. Hama'anam. Recommended resources. Books: The Greenlanders by Jane Smiley, fiction but historically researched. Greenland by Ole G. Jensen, history. Indigenous authored works about Inuit culture and history. Documentaries, Angry Inuk, 2016, about sealskin trade and indigenous rights. People of a Feather, 2011, Inuit and their relationship with environment. Organizations to follow, Inuit Circumpolar Council, www.inuitcircumpolar.com. Greenland's government, nalakasuisut.gl. Indigenous climate action, learn the language. Kalaallisut language resources are available online. Learning even basic phrases shows respect. A personal message. Creating this video was both an honor and a responsibility. We consulted historical sources, academic research, and tried to center Kalaallit voices and perspectives. We recognize we're not Kalaallit ourselves, and we may not have gotten everything perfect. If you're Kalaallit or another indigenous person and we've made errors or told something incorrectly, please let us know respectfully in comments. We're here to learn and to amplify truth, not to speak over indigenous voices. The purpose of this video is to share a history that's been suppressed, honor indigenous resistance and resilience, educate non-indigenous viewers, support indigenous self-determination, challenge colonial narratives. If we've succeeded even partially, we're grateful. One final thought. The story of Kalaallit Nunaat is ultimately a story of hope. Despite everything, the cultural genocide, the forced relocations, the abuse, the theft, the attempts to erase them, the Kalaallit people remain. They've survived. They're reviving their culture. They're asserting their rights. They're moving towards self-determination. This isn't just their victory. It's a lesson for all of us about the indomitable nature of the human spirit, about the importance of cultural identity, about why colonization must be opposed wherever it occurs. The ice never forgets. The people never surrender. And justice, though delayed, continues to be demanded. Kujanak, thank you in Kalaallisut for listening to this story. May it inspire you to learn more, to do more, to be part of decolonization and indigenous sovereignty movements wherever you are. Remember, like this video. Subscribe for more untold histories. Comment your thoughts and location. Share with everyone who needs to hear this. The story continues, the struggle continues, and we all have a role to play. Solidarity with Kalaallit Nunaat, solidarity with indigenous peoples everywhere. Copyright 2024. This story is dedicated to the Kalaallit people, past, present, and future.